kind of big presentation, so.
Yeah. This presentation is actually based on an update that I did at Warpstock Europe earlier this year, which really dealt with 5.03 and 5.1. And when I went to update it for 5.04 and 5.1, I realized that, yeah, there are some significant changes. So let's see if I can go through it so that everyone gets an idea as to what's on the horizon. First of all, before I even begin, just a quick refresher. ArcaOS 5.0 was released in May of 2017. Shortly after that, we released 5.0.1 to address some shortcomings that we had with specific hardware during the installer process. Then we released 5.0.2 to further refine the installer. And 5.0.3 we just released last month. So that's 4 releases of ArcaOS 5 in about 15, 16 months. 5.0.4 is scheduled for release probably before the end of this year. It all depends on what happens in testing. We may end up having to push that into January, but I think that sometime after Thanksgiving we should be able to release it. It depends. There are a couple big things that are coming that normally would not be coming in a bug fix release, but we're going to preview some of the work that is on the way to 5.1, so that may take us a little bit longer in testing. So ArcaOS 5.0.4 is currently in beta. We shipped the first beta release to everyone last week. I think it was beginning of last week I sent it out to everyone. With just the first handful of fixes in it and changes. Some focal points. We're still working on refining the installer. The installer works, obviously, but there are certain things in the installer that can be made better. I'll talk about those as we go on. The Samba client is going to get an update. Actually, I wanted to do the Samba client update in 5.0.3, but I had some packaging issues. In the interim, Paul has updated Samba once again. We're now at Samba 4.9.0 for the client, which is the latest Samba available from the main Samba project. So I want to get that in there. We want to get that in there. And of course, there are minor bug fixes. FAT32, we've said several times, we want to get the cache working for FAT32 so it performs better. We have some updates to utilities. As our translators have been working on some of our smaller components that we use, like the disk utility and the installation volume manager, we've had some other little bug fixes along the way as the translations have been committed to the repository. So even though 5.0.4 is going to be in English, those utilities have been refreshed and they haven't made their way into the main repository for ArcaOS. So those should get in there for 5.0.4. We have some printer driver updates. Everyone's going to be happy to hear that. The PostScript driver package, PS Print, has been updated from the 9.0.5 release that we shipped with ArcaOS 5.0 to 9.0.7. That will be in there. And we have a new driver for Brother printers.
Well, much appreciated.
Thanks to Andy Willis. And we have a new driver for Lexmark printers, thanks to Rich Walsh, and we'll get those drivers in the distribution as well. And we're going to premiere an update utility finally. So that you won't need to completely wipe and reformat your disk just to get the next version of the operating system. Yeah, that was okay when we did the first install. But after 5.0.1, 5.0.2, and now 5.0.3, that whole process has sort of worn out its welcome.
And will that just be when you run the install, it'll ask you if you wanna do an update rather?
Well, we're gonna talk about that in a minute. We're still formulating those procedures. So there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of things are still in flux, but I'll talk about the couple different methods that we've discussed for applying the updates. It's going to be English again only. NLVs will make their debut with ArcaOS 5.1. Translations are just an immense project. And that work is ongoing. We have started. We have German, Spanish, and some French, but mainly German and Spanish are in the repository for selected components of the operating system, not the whole thing. So changes in the installer. We found that there are some systems that have unusual memory layouts, so that when you boot either from DVD or from a USB stick, before you can even get to the pre-boot menu, it tells you that there isn't enough memory in the system. You say, I've got 12 gigabytes of RAM in this machine, how can there not be enough memory? It's the memory below the, in the first 1024, in the first megabyte, is that where I'm thinking? Anyway, we need a certain amount of contiguous memory in order to start the installer. And when there's a hole there, we don't do a very good job of mapping around the hole. And we can reduce the minimum memory requirement, and that's great for some things. But the USB stick requires more memory in that space up to the hole than we can reasonably reduce our memory requirement. So we're looking at ways that we can just better map around holes in the lower memory area. That will assist with installing some newer systems. The volume selections page. Right now, as I've said to this point, when you do an ArcaOS install, you're going to reformat the volume anyway. So if we encounter a volume that's got its dirty flag set, and we're going to format that volume anyway, why is the drop-down list empty? And we tell you, well, you need to run checkdisk. You need to run checkdisk on a volume that's going to be formatted. That's kind of silly and counterproductive. We're working on that. We're working on that. So that what we're going to do in the volume selection for the system volume is we will list all of the possible target volumes, which means HPFS and JFS volumes that are on the system, regardless whether they're clean or dirty, because we're going to reformat it anyway. Update is a completely different process. I'm just talking about the install right now, a fresh install. We're going to try to do some better validation of config sys. Anyone familiar with the later versions of test log, disk utility, the installation and maintenance volume manager, that will just be tweaked a little bit. There are some new warnings added to the disk utility for systems that have GPT disks in them, non-standard for us disk layouts, to give the user a better idea as to what he should do in order to be able to install. The Samba update 4.9 client is going to replace the existing 4.4 client, And if you install, when you install ArcaMapper actually ships with its own older copy of the Samba client utilities. We want all of those at the same level, and they'll all be the 4.9 level. Because Samba 4.4 is no longer supported upstream by the main Samba project. So it's time for us to get off of that one. ANPM and Yum RPM updates. ANPM 1.0.4 is now sort of in beta. We haven't released a beta to the testers yet, but we've been testing it internally, so I should say it's in alpha. ANPM 1.0.4 adds support for warp-in archives. So you'll be able to, for a configured warp-in repository, when a warp-in package has been updated, and one of the archives within that package is newer than one that's installed on your system, you'll be able to download that new warp-in containing that archive and run warp-in to update your installation. So essentially what we do is we treat warp-in archives the same way we treat RPMs. So we have a unified package management interface. We're working on that right now. Latest updates to RPM packages. You know what happens is we wait until we get close to the point where we're going to release, and then we update the on-disk repository and the Yum RPM bootstrap on the ISO, and we go with that. We really only do one update to those components before we release. But we want it to be as close to the latest available so that when you're done with the install, you don't have to then go through a Yum update to download another 50 new files that are newer than what we ship on the DVD. So that will be updated as far as we can make it. Now, the update utility. So there are three things you need to think about in terms of updating. There's updating, there's upgrading, and then there's migration. Update is ArcaOS 5.0. something to the latest ArcaOS 5.0. something. That's an update. An upgrade is ArcaOS 5.0. something to ArcaOS 5.1. something. So we don't have to worry about upgrading just yet. Migration is Ecom Station 2.1 to ArcaOS 5.1. Migration and upgrade are planned for ArcaOS 5.1. Update, which is what concerns us right now, so that you don't need to do a clean install of ArcaOS every time you release a point update. We want to release with 5.0.4. Ideally, you should be able to insert your DVD or mount your DVD or insert your USB stick and select the option to update what you have. Now, whether that happens, whether we have to boot from that media first and then select update, or we insert the media from a booted system and then tell it to update the booted system, we have not determined yet. So we're not sure yet whether the update facility is going to be an enhancement to the installer for ArcaOS, or it's going to be a standalone second utility on the installation media. Those details are still being hashed out, very vocally by some of us. Most of the updated content, and we've planned this for a while, it should be available as subscription download. So if you go to your ArcaOS order page, most of the content that we release on an updated DVD should be available for download individually from there. That hasn't worked out as well as we'd like, because all of this is labor intensive. figuring out exactly what packages changed from 5.0 on forward, and then adding those to subscription downloads, and then being able to identify for people, well, if you already have ArcaOS 5.0.2, you don't need to download this update. It's a process. It's coming, and we hope to have that available when we do the 5. Sometime, maybe even before we do the 5.0.4 update, so that at least people with 5.0.1 or 5.0.2 can download the updates that were included in 03. So the next bit that I'm going to discuss here, dealing with ArcaOS 5.1, or what we like to say in the financial industry as forward-looking statements. We make no guarantee as to the accuracy of these remarks. These are plans. We hope to do this. It would be great if we can do this, and I want to share those dreams with you right now.
But not guaranteed.
There is nothing on paper, no files exist, no code has been written, okay? This is entirely vapor. But it's one step beyond pure air, hot air. ArcaOS 5.1. So we have several focal points. Localization is the big one. We want to be able to ship ArcaOS 5.1 in at least German, Spanish, and probably one double byte language, Japanese or Korean. We want to be able to upgrade ArcaOS 5.0 in place to ArcaOS 5.1. No more, we need to wipe everything you've spent the last year and a half building for yourself and start over from scratch. We want to be able to migrate anything from Warp 4 on up to the latest ArcaOS 5. That's a huge undertaking right there. Because the layout, as you know, for Warp 4 is considerably different than the layout for modern OS 2 systems. Ecom Station will be a lot easier to migrate, but we actually do have users who have MCP and MCP2 in use, and they're switching to ArcaOS. And they would much prefer to be able to transfer that desktop that they've been using for the last 20 years to ArcaOS 5. So we're going to try to do that migration. And we're going to get rid of the cursed selective installer from Warp 4. And we're going to replace that with specific installers for specific components. There isn't going to be one unified selective install utility. But like right now, we have a rewritten selective install for networking. We'll have selective install for audio. We'll have selective install for video, so that you can swap your video driver around from Panorama to Snap. You can swap your audio driver around, so that if you have UniAud installed and you find, you know, I just got this great pair of USB speakers, and I want to switch to the USB audio driver, you'll be able to switch your audio driver from UniAud over to USB audio with one of these specific installers. And the installer will only have the option to change your audio driver for you, and you won't have to worry about, if I leave that unchecked, is it going to remove something? Is it going to add something it shouldn't add? All that's going to go away. Oh, and you'll be able to change your locale. That's the other thing, a locale switcher, which we don't have yet. And we're going to have some new utilities and productivity apps. Some new editors we're going to add. Alex has been working on a new editor in Qt to essentially replace AE, AE has some shortcomings to it. It really needs some tender love and care. There's no active maintainer for that right now, and it has some interesting quirks to it. Alex has a new Qt-based text editor. It's a simple text editor called Quick Editor. And he's actually worked out so that he has a Qt application which uses native OS2 help, and it almost feels like a native OS2 PM application. That will be one of the new utilities that we add. We'll see. We're still gathering the list together. So changes in the installer. The idea behind localization for me is that if I'm German and I don't speak any English and I don't read any English at all, I should be able to take a disk that I purchased from my local German reseller, put it in my computer, and boot it up in my language without having to see any English or understand any English. That's the gold standard. How close we get to that, I don't know yet, but that's where we're aiming. Originally, I suggested that we ship multiple languages on one DVD. The problem with that is that the DVD content gets to be very large. And how many people who need an English DVD are also going to need German and Spanish and Japanese? Not many. And how many who want a German DVD are going to need English and Spanish and Japanese? So we will have individual ISOs in individual languages. That keeps the downloads as small as possible and targeted. And if you have a license for ArcaOS 5.1, it is a license for ArcaOS 5.1. You can download the English ISO, you can download the German ISO, you can download all of them, it doesn't matter. You have a license, so you may install any of them on one system. So you don't need to purchase a specific German license or an English license or a Spanish license. The license itself for ArcaOS remains in English and is not translated. And there are a number of legal reasons for this. We're still hassling this out internally. There are two different camps divided on this. There's a lot of legalese. Remember that the core of the ArcaOS license we inherited from IBM. So it contains a lot of IBM's legalese from the 1980s. And this is one of the reasons why there's no provision for doing a second install on the local drive for a maintenance partition, because IBM's license specifies one bootable installation. That's the way software licenses were written then. Nowadays, we wouldn't write something like that. Even when you purchase a license for Windows Server, you have a right to install one physical server and multiple virtual servers. Their virtual machines only existed for mainframes at the time. So it wasn't an issue for OS2. IBM never made a provision for a license for OS2 that included the ability to install a half dozen virtual installations of OS2. Because that license is so specific to IBM's needs and desires and wishes, translating it to other languages becomes somewhat arduous. IBM never translated their license either. So the official binding license will remain in English. We will provide a courtesy translation of the license, which is a non-binding translation. In other words, that is just as a convenience for the reader if he's not able to read English, so you can read the intent of the license in his language. But it's the English that's binding. We'll expand the software selections page to include some new options, so you don't need to install all the new stuff that we ship with ArcaOS 5.1. And the installer itself is going to remain relatively unchanged. Throughout the 5.0 release cycle, we've worked to refine the installer to get it to the point of where we want it to be for the rest of the Series 5 releases at least. Upgrade versus migration. So an upgrade is when you boot an ArcaOS 5.1 DVD, or maybe you'll boot the ArcaOS, you'll boot your own ArcaOS 5 installation and do an upgrade after you insert the 5.1 DVD. Again, this is still up in the air to be decided. But the idea is, in general terms, that you insert your 5.1 media and you upgrade your 5.0 system to 5.1. And when you're done, you end up with your familiar desktop with the new components that you've selected for 5.1 added to that desktop, your wallpaper as it was on your desktop before, everything working as it was before, but now running on ArcaOS 5.1. That's, again, we're talking the gold standard. That's the way we want it to be. A migration is, you've got Ecom Station 2.1 and you want to go to ArcaOS 5.1, and you have spent decades, literally, building your Ecom Station 2.1 desktop. And when you see that text that says you're going to need to reformat your hard drive and install this fresh, and the color just drains from your face, and you feel the blood in your body going down to your feet, and you're thinking, what am I going to have left when this is done? The idea here is that we're going to do the same thing for you here that we would do if you were already running ArcaOS 5, and that desktop that you've spent decades building is just going to get moved over to ArcaOS 5.1. All of your installed software will get migrated, and everything will work as it was working before, plus everything new in ArcaOS 5.1, and life will be good.
How can you do that for Warp 4 though? You know, as you're saying, assuming boot volume is LVM to HPFS or JFS, and that's going to be exciting.
Well, yeah, you're right. What's going to happen is we'll need to, with Warp 4, we'll need to at least add LVM to the volume.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see how that goes.
Okay.
I mean, the concept is that if you have Warp 4 with no fix packs on it,
Yeah.
you should, in theory, be able to end up with ArcaOS 5.1 and that, whatever was on your Warp 4 desktop. That's a tall order. I know, I know. We may not get there in 5.1. We may be able to do Ecom Station 1.0 onward.
Right.
And then maybe it'll be a separate utility as needed for a particular client to do the upgrade from Warp 4.
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Forward-looking statements. So we have several languages that we actually have in the tree in various stages of completion. Spanish, French, Italian, Dutch, German. I think I may have part of Portuguese in the repository at this point. Japanese, Korean.
Chinese.
I don't think we have either traditional or simplified Chinese in the repository yet. But we have a smattering of languages, and I even have a skeleton for Finnish in the repository. When IBM moved from Warp to MCP, they dropped a whole bunch of languages. And then from MCP to MCP2, they dropped some more languages. Alex has a process for actually starting off with OS2 Warp 4 and being able to use that as a base for the language. Obviously, whatever IBM left untranslated would need to be translated later on. But we can start with something as far back as Warp 4. So a language that was supported in Warp 4 and dropped by MCP2, we have a reasonable shot at producing an ArcaOS 5 NLV for that language. So we'll see. It's translation is a lot of work. There's a lot of manual work that goes into it, and then there are some applications where the language file is not separate but compiled into the binary, and replacing those message strings, replacing the English in them with another language becomes a process. Prioritization of languages, it's really market demand. We know that there are a lot of German users, and a lot of German users have been asking for an NLV version of the operating system. If that should change tomorrow and I get a lot of users in France asking for a French version, then we will shift our priorities accordingly. We have a very, very active Spanish-speaking contributor, a couple of them.
Yep.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
yeah, but Alfredo is the one that is making all, I'm just the one slowing him down.
Alfredo's amazing.
Yeah,
Alfredo's like a
I'm
whirlwind.
slowing him down, to be honest.
He's incredible. But as a result, Spanish is probably farther along in German at this point, just because of the amount of effort being put in by translators. Matthias has done some good translation work recently too. So we'll see. But German, from a marketing perspective, we have demand for German, and so that's at the top of our list. From an Everest perspective, some double byte character set language, Japanese or Korean, is in the plan for 5.1 coming out. How many Korean licenses for ArcaOS we would sell is anyone's guess. But Alex would like to have one double byte character set out there. Double byte character set OS2 is considerably different than the OS2 that we're used to seeing. There are a lot of binary files that are completely different for the double byte character sets. And so it's a technical challenge. So it's just one of those pet projects.
You have to also deal with all the things that you've added on top, like.
Exactly. So it's not just the core operating system, but all of the third-party components that we ship with it, like DVD tools, archive tool, X Workplace, ArcaOS Desktop, I should say. All of that stuff needs to be translated. The X Workplace translations that we use for ArcaOS Desktop are considerably dated, and they need to be updated. And there are tons of strings in that. And that's just an amazing project unto itself to translate and bring up to date. And then, of course, there's documentation that needs to be translated. So it's not just message files like please insert your floppy disk in drive A, translate that into 15 languages. But all of the books and help files that ship with the operating system for third-party components. And in fact, IBM didn't even ship translations of a lot of their manuals. They shipped them in English. I happened to find, you remember in WinOS 2, the Adobe Type Manager for ATM fonts? IBM, in the German NLV of Warp 4 and later MCP2, shipped the English ATM application in WinOS 2. So WinOS 2 fires up and it's all in German, and then you click on ATM to adjust your Adobe Type Manager in Win 3.1, and it's all in English. Well, I found the German Adobe Type Manager, and I'd like to get that into the German ArcaOS. So it's little stuff like that along the way, but translation is like a thing unto itself. It's like, take the complexity of releasing an operating system and now multiply that. Even if you have a completely functional operating system that needs no other work whatsoever, you essentially start from scratch to make sure that everything is translated and that everything works after the translation.
So
Multiply
with
that
like
by-
Korean, how, what do you find a volunteer that's interested and you pay them, or you just get
Well,
somebody that's
it
interested?
depends. I mean, if you find a volunteer, I mean, volunteers are great. We love volunteers. We have a few volunteers, and we have a base for the Korean Warp 4 that was actually built by Ko Myung-hun. But he hasn't stepped forward to say, you know, I'd like to translate everything else that's in the operating system. For good reason. I can understand, you know. So we'll see. In some cases, we may have to pay for professional translations of various components. It all depends upon how we go. The ISO itself, as I said, will be a single language, and the USB stick package will be a single language. Sorry, that other slide was supposed to have been deleted. So the distribution will be a single language, as I mentioned before. And the third-party content is the biggest hurdle to this. I mean, IBM gave us a leg up on the translation, so most of the base operating system was translated in the 1990s by IBM. It's all the stuff after that that needs to be translated. Some of the third-party components already do have translations. So for instance, DVD tools, there are translations available in that. Of course, ArcaOS Package Manager, we have probably 8 or 9 languages available for ArcaOS Package Manager now. Those things already have languages. That's not a big deal. But there are a lot of other smaller components that have no translations available at all yet. And those are the things, you know, just imagine that you install an English operating system and everything's in English, and you open up one utility and everything in the user interface and all the help is in Finnish. And you think, how am I supposed to use this? I mean, I don't even know what this utility does, and I can't even figure it out from the interface because I don't speak and I don't read Finnish. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We want the whole thing translated. So some new content that we're going to add to 5.1 is Gotcha, thanks to Greg and his hard work on that. And Gotcha is going to be available in the installer so that when you say, I was installing ArcaOS 5.1 and I was making my selections on the hardware page, and when I was clicking on radio buttons, which are supposed to be mutually exclusive, 2 of them selected. And if you send us a ticket like that now, we'll say, yeah, right, I'll bet 2 of them were selected. Okay, I'll bet. Now you'll be able to take a picture and prove it. And you'll be able to submit that picture right from the Aurora web browser in the maintenance, the system management interface in the installer. The data transfer agent that I talked about for audio in Windows 3.1 sessions will be included in ArcaOS 5.1. Translated too. That's sort of how we discovered that we were missing some sources.
Well, you have presented Portuguese for Gotcha.
Gotcha, we do have Portuguese. We're going to remove the Warp 4 selective install. It's just an evil utility. It's evil. It does terrible things. One of the known issues, by the way, is whenever I go to a technical conference, I expect that I should come away with at least one nugget of information that is going to make my life easier going forward. And if I come away with that one nugget, I know that the entire week or weekend or day was worth the trip. Sometimes I get lucky and I come away with 2 nuggets, or sometimes I get really lucky and I come away with 3 nuggets. So here's a nugget, hopefully, that you can take home with you. If you have to run selective install now, it is going to add device equals com.sys and device equals vcom.sys to your config sys, whether or not you have a serial port. And when you reboot the machine, you're going to get an error if you don't have a serial port, telling you that com.sys could not be loaded. Press enter to continue. After which, you're going to get an error that says vcom.sys could not be loaded. Press enter to continue. That's selective install doing you the favor of adding serial device support for you, even when you haven't selected it in the installer. There's only so much we can do with it, and we've pretty much done whatever we can. You'll need, if you run, so the moral of the story is that if you have to run selective install now, before you shut down the machine and reboot, edit config sys and check for odd lines. The com.sys lines are the 2 that will stand out. We're going to just get rid of the thing. There's no way to fix it. We don't have the source to fix it. And it's just a behemoth. It was just not very well designed at the time. I mean, maybe for OS 2.0 it was a good idea and worked, but by the time we got to Warp, it started to be less than useful. But there are some things that you can only do with the selective installer, like locale, changing your locale.
But it was legacy in 2.0, wasn't it? I mean, it was already.
Yeah, I mean, you think they could have spent a little bit of time with it then,
Yeah.
and saved us all this agony this far out. It's not that you can't change your locale. You can change your locale in the locale object in system setup. You can't change your keyboard.
Oh.
You can't change your keyboard layout without selective install.
Does it still trap if you try to uncheck the multiprocessor thing with the box?
No, we disabled that. We didn't actually disable it, but we have it pointing off in another direction to disable something else. There is a checkbox to, when it detected that you were running a multiprocessor machine, it would magically provide a little checkbox so that you could enable SMP support. Unfortunately, doing that would lock the machine dead right in the water right then and there. And I thought, well, now, how are we going to ship this utility if it absolutely will kill the machine while you're using it? So we couldn't hide that checkbox. We tried. We couldn't hide the checkbox. So the next best thing was to make the checkbox do nothing. So if you check that box, it will set something that doesn't exist in memory, but it's very happy that it doesn't issue an error for it, and the machine just keeps going. It was the best available option at the time. It's going to go, though. We're finally going to get rid of it. I'm going to drive a wooden stake through it. We'll be done with it. Instead, we're going to have the individual single-purpose tools, as I mentioned before. So you need to change your keyboard. You'll be able to change your keyboard with a tool to change your keyboard layout. If you're going to change your audio driver, you'll change your audio driver with a tool to change your audio driver. And as I mentioned before about adding text editors and some other small productivity tools, we want to add some of that stuff. A converter would be nice to have for US to metric, handy stuff. And a small desktop calendar that doesn't have to be an information manager, just a calendar. So other ongoing development at ArcaOS. Obviously, device driver enhancements. USB 3 is still on the hot list. AHCI is pretty stable at this point. Multi-Mac is fairly stable except for the missing WLAN, and that we haven't forgotten that. We're definitely going to get to the WLAN. We realize that GenMac is really at end of life, and we include it as what we say is we include GenMac as a convenience feature. We don't support GenMac. A quick note here, you'll find that a lot of new machines are coming with drives that are called NVMe drives. We do have a long-term plan to develop an NVMe driver in order to handle those devices. We haven't started on the driver yet, but we're aware of the fact that we're going to need to support NVMe, and that will be coming. It will not be some enhancement to AHCI. AHCI will be for SATA, and that will stay that way. It will be a driver base dev equals NVMe.add or whatever we call it. Ongoing ACPI maintenance, that is a never-ending process because Intel keeps dropping ACPI CA updates and David keeps dropping them in. And we find other things that need to be tweaked, massaged, made better to support a wider range of systems that are on the fringe of the specification, shall we say. So we just consider ACPI part of our ongoing operating system maintenance. We do want to have a new audio driver to replace UniAud that will support the newer audio chips. It will be based on FreeBSD. David's been working on other things, and we just deprioritize the audio driver. But it hasn't fallen off the drawing board yet. We want to update and modernize Snap so that we can support some newer chipsets, systems with widescreen displays. It's not that we don't support the widescreen, it's that the chips that drive those display resolutions were not included in Snap's support. So we want to add those chips. So for instance, the first chip that we want to add is the Intel high definition video driver, which is typically part of most modern Intel processors. So if you've got a board with an Intel processor and included graphics, that chipset is what we want to support, the Intel HDs.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
And about Panorama, well, reading about Panorama, it says it is actually not a driver. It's
Correct.
like something that grab from the BIOS, or translate the video from the BIOS.
Panorama does not accelerate the video
Okay.
output. It does not speak directly to any particular chipset. It speaks to the VISA BIOS in the video hardware. Snap, for supported chipsets, speaks to the chip for which we have a driver. So if you have an ATI card, we know how to handle ATI chips at a certain level. So functions that are provided by that chip, such as multi-head support, we can enable in Snap because Snap is talking to the chip. Multi-head support is not part of a VISA BIOS. VISA doesn't know anything about multi-head. So that's why a driver like Panorama can't do multi-head.
But what will be the idea that if on a Snap we have the driver, you better use Snap for your machine if we have the driver, or if Snap has the driver. if it doesn't have the driver, it's better to use Panorama or it's better to use Snap unsupported, it's called? Snap?
Unaccelerated.
Unaccelerated. What is
Panorama
better?
performs better
Yeah,
for unaccelerated video than Snap does.
okay.
Snap's unaccelerated video support fallback position is much older than Panorama.
Okay.
So for now at least, unless you have a chipset that you know is supported by Snap, such as an ATI X300 or an ATI X600, you're better off using Panorama. So if you have a modern ATI chipset, Radeon HD or something, stick with Panorama. Because Snap is going to give you, first of all, a 4x3 display that's going to get stretched on your screen. So everything's going to look, every circle is going to look like, like it's been stepped on. If you have a chip that is supported, if you have an older laptop or something, Snap is your driver of choice because Snap is going to drive that. Snap is your driver of choice for a couple of reasons. First of all, on an older machine, you don't have the processing power for the graphics. So what's going to happen is if you use an unaccelerated driver, your video performance is really going to be sluggish. If you use Snap, which is an accelerated driver, and it supports your chipset, your video performance is going to be very responsive. So that's why Snap is your driver of choice for supported systems. And there are a limited number of chips, and in the Snap document, which is on the ArcaOS installation DVD, we have a list of supported video chips, cards. It's sort of a mix of chips and cards that's on there.
It's like that comment that
yeah.
if you had a new system like the ones I described in my presentation,
Mhm.
and you had plugged in an ATI card or a Matrox card to get that Snap accelerated
Mhm.
video, you could upgrade your video by unplugging that and selling it and just using the motherboard graphics in Panorama. It would be a lot faster.
Yeah, it's a lot
than the
faster.
accelerated video.
Mhm.
And not every situation, maybe you have software that particularly is suited to your ATI, but.
Well, I mean, if
it's-
you've got an ATI card, the graphics processor is not as powerful as the CPU in the base machine.
Right,
So the fact that you can talk to the graphics processor directly doesn't really get you very far.
right,
But if you have an older machine,
yeah.
it makes a huge difference because now you're not laboring your CPU with
Graphics.
doing the graphics, exactly, graphics rendering. And we also want to support additional, with the new chipset support, we want to support additional output ports because the newer systems are shipping with mini HDMI, and they're shipping with DisplayPort 2 outputs. Right now, unless that's supported in the BIOS, and you can say specifically in the system setup, I want all the video to go out the DisplayPort, there's no way to switch to that in Snap, because Snap doesn't know what that port even is. Better foreign mass storage device handling. So what this means is, if someone gives you a USB stick that was prepared on a Windows machine that doesn't have any LVM on it, we want to be able to recognize that and be able to use it without having to go through the hoops of adding LVM to it. Or if someone gives you an 8 gigabyte or 16 gigabyte USB stick that has no partition on it, it exceeds the large floppy limit. And we wouldn't be able to see that. Because there's no partition on it, it won't have LVM on it, but because it exceeds 2 megabytes, sorry, it's too large for us to treat it as a large floppy. So we don't understand how to use that. We want that problem to go away. So that if someone hands you a stick that was prepared on a Windows machine or a Linux machine, you should be able to stick it into ArcaOS and read what's on it and write to it and hand it back to your friend, and he should be able to stick it back in his machine and be able to read what you copied onto that stick. So, better foreign mass storage device handling. Some research projects that are ongoing. UEFI booting. Is everyone familiar with EFI, Extensible Firmware Interface, and UEFI, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface? We're all used to systems that ship with a traditional BIOS. The machine boots up, you press F1 or you press delete, or you press F2 on an AMI BIOS, used to be, and you get into the system setup, and then you configure the system from there. UEFI machines don't have that. They don't configure, they don't have a set basic input-output system the way a traditional PC has. So as a result, ArcaOS can't boot on them unless they provide what's called a compatibility support module, a CSM, or what is often termed in the system setup, legacy support. Intel has already said that that will be going away in their chipsets in 2020, I believe. And they believe that it is up to the hardware manufacturers, the PC manufacturers, to include their own compatibility support modules. We need either a traditional BIOS or a compatibility support module which emulates a traditional BIOS in order to boot ArcaOS. We're looking at solutions to that problem so that we can boot on a UEFI system without the vendor supplying a compatibility support module. There are several different options available to us. One of the options being considered is using something called SeaBIOS, S-E-A BIOS, which is essentially a portable compatibility support module, open source, that is launched at initial system boot to then load that CSM into memory to emulate BIOS and give us the ability to boot an operating system that requires a BIOS. That's one approach. We're looking at that approach. There are other approaches to the problem. It will be a problem by the middle of the next decade. It will be a huge problem for us. Likely sooner than that, it will be a problem for us. It is a problem for us on some systems now. So we're working on that. Don't think that we're unaware of the fact that eventually systems that have a usable BIOS will be going away and will not be able to boot on a machine that's newer than 10 years old. With the UEFI support, GPT support, is everyone familiar with GPT? GUID partition tables. This is a different partition table scheme than our master boot record that we have now. Master boot record, you're allowed 4 partitions, right? And you can split one or more of those into a group of logical partitions. And we know that OS2 can boot from a logical partition. In order to boot from a logical partition, you need a boot manager installed. And the boot manager can either be installed in a primary partition marked bootable, or it can be installed in track 0 of the disk, like AirBoot is installed. GUID partition tables, GPT does not work that way. There's no master boot record. So we need a master boot record in order to create an LVM'd partition for a JFS volume or an HPFS volume. So we're looking at ways that we can boot on systems that just have GPT. Most modern Windows systems, Windows 10, are shipping with GPT drives. So you have a machine that came preloaded with Windows 10, you get your ArcaOS DVD and you figure this is great, I'll set up a multi-boot system. And you put in your ArcaOS DVD and we don't find a drive that we can even use. We can't even resize your Windows partition. Instead, the disk utility says, you're using a GPT disk, we can't use it. The answer is reformat your disk. That's a very inconvenient solution to the problem. There are other workarounds for GPT, so GPT can contain an MBR in it in what's called a guard partition. I can't remember the terminology exactly. But we have no facility right now for making that happen. Also, MBR is one of the things that's limiting us to 2 terabyte devices. So GPT will allow us access to huge devices when our other device drivers are able to do that. We're looking at solutions to that problem. As I mentioned, the snap enhancements. Better memory management overall, so we don't run out of lower shared memory and have to unload everything and reboot the machine, and the memory gets so fragmented that even unloading Firefox and OpenOffice doesn't recover enough, and we still have to reboot the machine. We're looking at solutions for that, so that memory doesn't fragment as badly, and we don't run out of it. And ArcaOS overall business. We are seeking more consulting opportunities. More consulting work means more working capital for us to do stuff that benefits everyone. We are investigating the rescue of some very handy and mature software titles, meaning software titles that are commercial in nature, that have been purchased once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. The current owner of the software doesn't even know that he owns the software, and it is just sitting in a file cabinet doing nothing. We would love to rescue that software and make it available for people to use. VxRex is a perfect example. VxRex from Whatcom is now in the hands of SAP. SAP doesn't even know what they have. I have contacted SAP. I've tried to work with them to either license the code, to resell new licenses for VxRex. They tell me they're going to get back to me. They don't even know where the code is. When Whatcom sold the first time, they open sourced the C compiler.
Yeah.
So we got open Whatcom. They didn't do that with VxRex. So VxRex was sold and sold and sold. And now SAP has it, and they don't even know, they don't sell it, they don't even know what to do with it. SAP, it's not like SAP sold it and discontinued it. It was a discontinued product when they bought the company that owned it last. It just went along with the portfolio. So there are other titles like that out there also that would be very useful to some people, and we would love to find those. So if you know of some, and you can give us some pointers as to who to contact and where we should go, we are happy to look at those opportunities. And of course, we're seeking more worldwide distribution channels. We have resellers around the globe, but only a handful. We would like to have more resellers. More resellers is good for business because it gets our name in places that we would not otherwise be able to get our name out in the public eye. So if you know of resellers in other countries, South America, Latin America, Africa, I don't think we have anyone on the African continent selling ArcaOS, as an ArcaOS reseller.
In Latin America, do you have some?
In South America?
Latin America, yes, South America.
Yes, Clip in Mexico.
Okay.
Well, Mexico isn't South America. He's about the closest one, though. He's the closest. Yeah, I don't have anyone. I don't have anyone in Brazil, for instance. So no, that's true. That's true because Joao is in Portugal. He's not in Brazil. So we're looking for more distributors around the world, even in countries where we already have distributors. I mean, we have 2 or 3 German distributors, but we'd be happy to take on a 4th German distributor. If you know someone in IT selling software talk us up, point us in that direction. I'm happy to contact people, that's not a problem for me. But the more the merrier. It's all a matter of getting the word out. And that's, oops, sorry. It.
Alrighty.
Any questions about ArcaOS 5.04 and ArcaOS 5.1? Gordon?
What about hardware, bare metal to run this on? What's the future look like for that?
Well, the UEFI is the biggest
Oh.
hurdle, and GPT. Bare metal is our target platform. Virtualization's great, and we know that virtualization is a workaround for systems where we can't boot on bare metal. But bare metal is what we really want to be able to do. Yeah.
That's what I want to.
That's the fun stuff, let's face it. So yes, we are still focused on bare metal installations.
There will be bare metal available.
That's our plan. That's
Yeah.
our plan. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And of course, it's going to be instantaneous.
Well, yeah, of course, and free. Everything's free.
Yes, yes.
Other questions?
This
Yeah.
NVMe hard drives,
Yeah.
can you describe what that is?
It's not, NVMe is an interface that's typically used for solid state devices. I don't know of any NVMe mechanical drives. So NVMe is a very wide bandwidth
Yeah.
interface. Go ahead.
Yeah, so,
Neil.
so SSDs are great big notebook size 2.5-inch drive format, and
Mhm.
NVMe is typically a lot smaller. So, you know, you'll have the, if it's in a machine, you'll have a connector with a little blip on it, and that's the hard drive. You know, it's 90% connector, 10% drive, and you plug that in.
Well, that's,
Eventually-
the connector is an M.2 format.
So I think, but where they're going, I think, is not with a connector, but to just
I have
have
one in
this
here.
either on the motherboard or
Yeah.
as part of the South Bridge, as part of the chip. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and they, you know, they're going toward well, why do we have all this junk? You know, we have a
Right.
CPU and then we have this other junk, why don't we just blow it
Right.
on the CPU? So I think, you know, the single chip PCs are gonna use this,
They come on
Interface.
motherboards too, there are connectors for them.
Yes.
I have
Yeah.
one in here actually,
yeah.
in a USB thing.
In fact, what
Right.
we had to do with ArcaOS 5.0.1 was we had to accommodate systems that had a mix of SATA and NVMe, so that we could ignore the NVMe and not mistake it for a SATA device that we were trying to access.
Yeah.
So, yeah, more and more systems are coming either hybrid SATA and NVMe or only NVMe.
Yeah.
People talk to you about, I have an M.2 drive, M.2. M.2 is a form factor and connector. That's what M.2 is. M.2 devices, solid state devices, are either NVMe or SATA devices.
Yeah.
There are 2 keying notches in an M.2 connector. They're considered to be at points B and point B and point M. Different cards, NVMe and SATA cards, will use one or the other or both of those notches in the cards. But you can't take a card that's got a single notch and plug it into an M.2 slot that's got 2 notches. Or you can't take a card that's got a B notch on it and plug it into a slot that's got an M key on it. It won't go in. It's horrifically confusing. But the NVMe interface itself, for talking to the card plugged into the slot, we don't have a driver for that at all right now. It's like we can talk to SCSI devices, we can talk to IDE devices. We don't have a driver for SAS, serial attached SCSI. We don't have a driver for that. And we don't have a driver for NVMe. SAS is really more for servers.
Yeah.
There are a couple of us who would love SAS support.
For RAID, yeah.
Yeah, there are a couple of us who would love SAS support. But We don't have a huge demand for it. NVMe is going to be a huge demand in a couple of years,
Mhm.
because SATA is going to be going away from the laptop form factor. Then it becomes an issue for us.
Yeah. Okay,
Is it
thank you.
a huge
You bet.
project?
Mhm.
The NVMe stuff, is it a huge project or?
Yes.
You didn't?
It's a whole other interface, so it's not like you can say, well, I'm gonna start with the AHCI driver and just make it talk to an NVMe
Right.
device.
Well, it's not that far from it, you know.
It's far enough when I was talking to David that,
Uh-huh.
it's going to be a separate project unto itself.
Oh, sure.
And there, there's, the AHCI driver is very stable right now,
Yeah.
and it performs very well. But I think if David were to start over doing an NVMe driver,
Yeah.
he would do a number of things differently
Of course.
from the get-go.
Of course.
So it's a big project in the sense that we will be starting that from scratch and using David's 32-bit
Yeah.
toolkit and so on and so forth. Obviously, it will be a 32-bit driver. The data path is just too wide to consider doing the 16-bit driver anyway. But we'll get there. It's on the map. We know that it's there. We know we have to deal with it, just like UEFI is on the map. We know we have to deal with it.
Does he consider it more interesting than Wi-Fi?
He doesn't consider it more interesting than Wi-Fi. In fact, we had a project, and I needed to get him a solid-state drive. And I mistakenly ordered an NVMe drive instead of a SATA drive. Not thinking at the time. And, or was it, yeah, I think that's what it was. And so, I had to replace the SATA drive, and I said, I want you to keep the NVMe drive. And he said, really, why? I said, you know exactly why.
No rush.
He said, okay, I'll put it back in the box and put it on the shelf for now. So, yeah, we know that we need to do it. But, it's another one of those things that until there becomes a pressing need, until there are more than a smattering of laptops that don't have SATA support, it's not a real issue. It becomes a real issue when we see, by next year, we're not gonna have devices with SATA, and we'll need another drive technology. Well, now it's an issue. Now it's a thing to be dealt with. We know about it, it's in the long-term plan.
And what about the what is it, GPT? The-
GPT,
What is that just some details
Quick
about the
partition.
beginning of the disk, or is it like a giant difference? or-
well, it's a giant difference in the sense that there's no master boot record on a GPT disk at all.
Uh-huh.
So,
And is that like boiled into some, innermost component of OS2, that master boot expectation, or?
it's certainly in OS2 DASD.
So that guy again?
Yeah, well, we can't boot the system without a master boot record.
Uh-huh.
We just don't see a disk at all.
Right.
So we need to have some way of dealing with GPT, and we don't right now. That came about long after IBM left the stage. And again, until Windows 10, it wasn't really an issue. With Windows 10, Microsoft has gone to all GPT setup. So if you install Windows 10 clean on a brand new drive out of the box, you get a GPT partition. You can tell it that you don't want GPT, but by default you get GPT. That wasn't the case up until Windows 10. So now it's an issue. Now we have to deal with it. And we sort of get the GPT stuff alongside the UEFI stuff, because all of that stuff sort of comes together in one bundle. Other questions? Phil?
Migration.
Yeah.
Is there any plans to include some sort of cleanup afterwards? Because as you're migrating from an older operating system to ArcaOS, there's bound to be all this extra junky stuff that you don't want. So how do you get rid of it?
Well, I think that the plan right now is that we'll move the old stuff into a new directory for review after the migration is complete. And we'll probably open a folder on the desktop and say, look, this is what's in your previous installation directory. And then you can go through and say, no, I want that utility, I can't download that from anywhere else. Or, you know, I don't even know what that directory is, so I can lose it. That's probably the best way of handling it. You know, there are two schools of thought. Number one is your drive should be big enough to accommodate the software that you need and still have plenty of room for growth. The other school of thought is, why do you need all this extra stuff? I mean, who cares? But then you have the problem of people not backing up. That may be the only copy of that software in that person's possession. And so do you want to just blow it away and get it off the drive, and then 6 months later the guy says, gee, you know, I needed that for work. You know,
Kind of special.
So it's stuff that we need to consider, and we haven't reached that point in the planning stage yet.
I didn't anticipate.
You know, I comment migration
covering a lot of
from
it.
a Novell standpoint.
Yeah.
When you do an in-place migration from NetWare 5 to NetWare 6, for instance, the migration utility actually creates a directory on the system volume, the sys volume, called sys.mig, which is system migrating. And everything that has been replaced with the new installation, the old stuff gets copied onto the sysmig directory, matching the original directory tree structure. And it's left to the admin to then go through sysmig and determine what I still need, what I don't need. It's an arduous task. Or, you know, I guess these days you would say it was an arduous task because not many people are migrating to NetWare 6. But I come from that mindset when it comes to migration of one operating system to another, is that we need to store that stuff somewhere, and someone should review it after the fact. But we should definitely consider cleaning up. So your question is definitely valid and definitely on our minds.
Windows 10 does the same thing. When you install a Windows 10, it'll take
Mhm.
the old Windows, let's say you have 7,
Mhm.
and it will copy it to its directory, and then it will create.
And Windows 10 gives you the ability at some point, if you want to roll back to 7,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, correct.
But not necessarily. I have a friend who I worked with for many years, and he was using Windows.
Mhm.
And he got the Windows 10 and installed it, and it destroyed all his software that he bought from third parties.
Yeah, I
He
believe
was
that.
very unhappy.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I believe that.
I'll bet.
Totally true.
Other questions?
Louis, just I want to like a reminder for you and the audience. How many years does ArcaOS has?
We haven't set a finite lifespan on.
No. How many years? No. How many years old is ArcaOS right now?
Right now, ArcaOS as a product is 1 year and a few months old.
Yeah, and I think in 1 year you have accomplished what the e-commerce station guys did in like 5.
Something like that.
I don't know.
Something like that.
You're only missing the translations to be exactly the same level
Yes.
for today.
Yes.
So I think it's a very remarkable
Thank you.
job.
Remarkable work.
Yeah, remarkable
Thank
work
you.
from the
Thank you very
team.
much.
I remember in Wichita when you didn't have anything, just the agreement with IBM and the debt with IBM, and you really pull it out in like a year from that, and now.
It's, when I look back on it and I think 5.0, 5.0.1, 5.0.2, 5.0.3, and I think that's really 4 operating system releases. And we did that in a little over a year. And I think, wow, you know, that is quite a bit of work.
Quite a bit.
And 5.0 was monumental in the first place. Because when we started 5.0, really we had Warp 4.52. And that was it. It's not like, you know, people say, well, what did you inherit from Ecom Station? Well, nothing. We had no deal in place with Mensis or XEU for any components from Ecom Station whatsoever. So everything that went into the ArcaOS repository started with IBM's Warp 4.52, MCP2, and then the rest of it was all us after that. The installer was written from scratch. all of that stuff was completely new and unique to ArcaOS. So, and even the open source tools, the slimmed down versions of the tools, for instance, DVD tools, there was work that went into that. We didn't just take CD, DVD toys and just not install some features. No, there were updates that needed to be done, and it needed to be massaged to do exactly what it does and behave the way it does for us. So even the stuff that you think was already pre-done wasn't done for us. So there's a lot that went into it. So thank you for recognizing that. I appreciate it. Thank you everyone for recognizing that. I hope my wife is watching this video stream.
Yeah. No, the other thing is, well, since I joined the translators teams, which I'm not doing a good job there, but I also see the internal effort of trying to relate things, checking the tickets, seeing how things evolve, how test versions are being released. For example, people here don't know all the test versions that you have released for, or the beta internal versions for the next release.
Yeah, we went through, how many betas for 503? Was it 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 beta
And you
releases.
even generate some in Spanish, which
And some of
for
them we
testing
did
in other
Spanish ones.
languages, just for testing and also for helping the translators.
The
So
next
we-
beta of 504 will have Spanish
Yeah.
and German available too.
Yeah, well, that's for testing until 5.1,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
but it is a lot of job, it is a lot of work, I see it, and sadly the people are outside. When I was outside of the translator team, I didn't saw it. So I say, what's going on? Nothing is happening, but something is moving. I can see that something is moving since I joined it.
Gary, go
Is
ahead.
the beta program for ArcaOS invitation only?
It is invitation only, and right now we are full for beta testers.
Okay.
But when we get to the 5.1 release cycle, we will probably be letting some beta testers go and taking on some new ones. So
Okay.
I'll keep you in mind.
Thank you.
Okay? You bet.
So are you gonna try to find a second David?
Well,
I mean, is
right
it
now,
basically
cloning is
possible?
not legal in the United States, so I can't clone him easily.
Is there another country you can?
Now, that's possible, you know, maybe we could ship him off to some other country and clone him there.
Sounds like Orphan Black.
It would be great if we had another device driver developer.
Mhm. Pretty specialized skill.
It's a pretty specialized skill. You know, you think that, well, how many PM developers could there be in the world? Well, then you think, how many OS2 device driver developers could there be in the world? Probably less than PM developers. So, yeah, we'd love to have another device driver developer. We don't right now. So, yeah, if I could find one, that would be terrific. That would be terrific. Phil, you had your hand up.
Yes, speaking of Martin in translation,
Mm-hmm.
if Spanish is done before the German translation, would you consider publishing the Spanish
Oh, absolutely.
first?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if it's, all the translation work is being done in parallel. So if Spanish overtakes German and it's more complete by the time we're ready to release 5.1, I'm happy to release the Spanish one first. I mean, you know, it's, the priorities, it's really just a matter of, we know that we have demand for German, and we have a leg up on German because IBM did a great job with German, so we start off with a decent German base. And a lot of the third-party stuff that we have in there already has German translations available. But
Yeah.
you know, if I were to guess today, I think that Spanish is probably ahead of German in terms of percentage of completion.
It is more common than English, so, you know, at least now.
Yeah, so I would be very happy to include Spanish first. I have no preference whatsoever one to the other.
Just
I
curious.
can muggle my way through both of them, so I can butcher either one equally.
Such talent.
Except that when I have to speak Spanish, I don't lapse into Yiddish. When I speak German, I often lapse into Yiddish, and then I insult someone's grandmother. It gets ugly. It gets ugly very fast. I can order at a restaurant though, Spanish or German. That's not a problem. Or French. I can do
Pretty
that
good.
too. Other questions? No? Good. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.